Hello, everyone. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting. Halo is a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago, and we provide a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo was founded to provide the process-oriented best practices of our team developed at top executive search firms with a cost-conscious scrappiness you'd expect from a boutique or startup. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology executives on a variety of topics, and we hope you'll be interested in joining our future event. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function in the toolbar, and we'll address those questions at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will have a recorded version available of this event on YouTube later today. For now, I would like to introduce our panelists. With introducing Otis Johnson. Otis is the Vice President of ERT's Trial Oversight Solutions. Otis is responsible for expanding the organization's reporting and analytics strategy. He has over 20 years of progressively expanded pharmaceutical experience and is passionate about the industry with expertise across clinical informatics, business analytics, sales, project management, and R&D. His experience ranges from running clinical trials at Merck to leading sales support and clinical informatics functions at Icon and Synosys Health. Otis also serves as ERT's Chief Diversity Officer and has been rolling out the company's diversity and inclusion program over the past year. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Odesa Stapleton. Odesa serves as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Bond Secure Mercy Health. She leads the ministry's effort to promote a unified, diverse culture and ensure alignment of the mission, vision, and values within her organization's multinational footprint. Ms. Stapleton is also responsible for all executive talent acquisition and the accountable executive for BSMH's initiatives related to the Health Anchor Network, a coalition of 60+ health systems dedicated to migrating the social determinants health. Ms. Stapleton joined Bond Secure Mercy Health in 2019 from Neighborhood Health Service Corp in Plainfield, New Jersey, where she was the Director of Human Resources and Operations for nearly 5 years. Ms. Stapleton is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and earned her law degree from the Benjamin N. Cordazo School of Law, Yeshiva University. She is a member of the Society of Human Resource Management, State Bar of Texas, American Bar Association, Alpha Phi Omega, and a certified secondary teacher. Early in her career, Ms. Stapleton researched and wrote labor and employment law books for businesses at Summer Press. And then I'd like to introduce Dr. Lonie Haynes. Dr. Lonie Haynes is a Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for AmerisourceBergen Corp. In this role, he leads AmerisourceBergen's journey to be a truly equitable organization that celebrates individuality while inspiring associates across all dimensions of diversity to achieve their full potential and to advance the company's purpose to create healthier futures. With over 25 years of diversity and inclusion experience, Dr. Haynes has a history of creating and executing strategies that inspire associates, as well as aligning diversity and inclusion with corporate strategies. Prior to joining AmerisourceBergen, Dr. Haynes, who is also a veteran, spent nearly 10 years at Highmark Health as a Chief Diversity Officer, where he was charged with aligning diversity and inclusion as a critical business component for advancing the mission and strategic business objectives of the company. And then I'll go ahead and introduce Andres Gonzalez. Andres Gonzalez has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 26 years. He has been instrumental in creating culturally and linguistically competent programs. He has served over the last 6 years as the Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer at Froedtert and Medical College of Wisconsin, located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He provides direction to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, where he leads diversity and inclusion strategic initiatives that include business resource groups, community engagement, diversity action teams, diversity and culture, competence education, emerging markets initiatives, health equity, language services, leadership development, supplier diversity, and talent acquisition. So let's start Let's start internally by looking within the healthcare organizations themselves. So our first question, how do you level set the terminology and differentiate between goals and quotas for people of color in healthcare organizations? Odesa, do you want to kick it off?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again so much for spending the time with us on a Friday afternoon. One of the things that we discussed as healthcare executives that comes up quite often in organizations when you are trying to be change agents around diversity, equity, and inclusion is the difference between setting a goal or being governed by a quota. And so just to level set here, we thought it would be important so others were understanding how we communicate about each, that a goal is more of a target that our organization, for example, at Bon Secours Mercy Health, sets for itself. And this is something that we aspire to achieve in alignment with our mission, our vision, and our values. And they're tied to our strategy and our vision. And quotas, on the other hand, are typically requirements or mandates that are often imposed by either a governmental entity, a legal body, someone trying to take action as a requirement to correct something that they failed to act on in the past. So an example of that would be a requirement where a company has to meet a certain quota in response to a consent decree. So it's important to know that what we're trying to do in diversity and inclusion is set goals, align with our organization's mission, and aspire to do what's right in and of itself when it comes to being more inclusive and the way that we look at diversity overall. And I'm not sure, again, if Otis wants to chime in on that as well. You're muted, Otis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for laying out that clear distinction, Odesa. It really makes a difference. So I have seen the word quota treated as a bad word. If a quota is set in the context of diverse hiring, one may think that you will fill the positions with many unqualified candidates to meet the set quota. So in this context, the term quota is perceived to carry a negative connotation. The term goal is a different story, on the other hand. I have not heard anything negative associated with having goals. What is problematic, however, is when you have no quotas and you have no measurable goals. If this is your approach to diversity and inclusion, your initiative is only a nice to have and not core to your organization. So in rolling out our diversity program, we decided against using the term quota. Instead, we treat diversity goals the way we treat annual goals and objectives, such as sales and revenue targets. We have set goals for the percentage of people of color and women in our leadership development programs. Those are prestigious programs that people aspire to. So we ensure that we have adequate representation of minorities and women in those programs through our goal setting exercise. So we've also set a percentage increase in diverse hiring year over year, and these are all measurable goals, not quotas. So we don't treat diversity as a nice to have, but as a necessity, and it's as something germane to the way we do business. So we seek to tie our diversity goals to real business problems that are important for our organization to solve. And this gives us a basis to objectively measure the value of diversity, and it gives us a better opportunity to create lasting change.
Great, thanks Otis and Odesa. The next question we would like to address, minorities and women remain underrepresented in healthcare professions today. I'd like the panelists to touch on strategies to increase representation in the healthcare workforces. Andres, do you mind sharing some insight on how you leverage your ERGs towards some of your efforts?
Absolutely. So first of all, Douglas, thanks for inviting me and to be part of this great esteemed colleagues here. Which I think it's delighted to be here, and certainly, and apologies as well. I had a little bit of a trouble with my technology folks, but it was resolved as well. So I think it's a great question. So I'll delineate a little bit of what we have done here in terms of our strategic approach. So about 5 years ago, when I arrived here, we decided that it was really important to look at the employee life cycle that HR certainly had as a framework, right? And one of the things that we learned, or that I learned actually early on, is that we did not have EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, right, built as an element into what we were doing from a people strategy. So that was one of the things that I learned, hence why we took this approach. And so when we started then going down this path and building the partnership and the synergy with HR, as part of looking at the employee life cycle, we started looking at what we call the pre-drivers, right? So let's look at our workforce development efforts. Let's look also what we're doing from a recruitment standpoint. And so one of the things that we're able to do there, as we also, right, on the other side of the strategy that we were driving around our business resource groups, and we call them business resource groups because they are truly providing not only their insights and their thought leadership, but they're also co-creating the strategies, right, to solve for complex issues that we're certainly addressing. They were instrumental in then helping us, right, to also co-create that strategy. So where we have landed at Freighter and the Medical College of Wisconsin is that when you look now at our workforce development efforts, we have a comprehensive and inclusive strategy around that, number one. Two is we have made some inroads in the community, especially diverse communities, i.e. the African American, Black, and the Latinx community here. Those are two vibrant communities here that we serve in the greater Milwaukee area. And then thirdly, we're able then to align our BRGs, right, as part of that particular strategy. So what we have done is talent delivery, which is what we call our talent acquisition department here. They drive the strategy, but then our BRGs and our Office of Diversity and Inclusion comes alongside, right, to inform, guide, and also to serve in that particular vertical. So what we have done there is that we have 3 or 4 key internship partners or partnerships in the community. And what we have done is really then build in our BRGs to provide from education, providing awareness, but also to serve as buddies or mentors of those interns. Ultimately, what we want to do is, right, the litmus test for us is, and having, right, clear metrics as well, is critical, is are we, right, hitting that mark of conversion? Are we, right, for those who are ready now, are we actually welcoming them as employees? And then furthermore, as part of that whole life cycle too, our BRGs are in lockstep with our career mobility office, which also resides under our talent delivery team, to be able then to guide, right, our staff once they're here to really then start mapping out their individualized development plan, right? So you're here, right? You were hired as whatever your job category, right, or role is, but how do we get you to point B, right? To wherever you want to go from here. And that has been part also of the work and the strategies our BRGs actually are helping us with. So we're seeing now that not only are they getting involved in our workforce development and recruitment efforts, but they're also helping us with career mobility, which equates to certainly retention and then ultimately to development within the organization, right? So it's actually providing, right, and living up to that exceptional employee experience. So that is actually one of the examples that I wanted to share here, because we're seeing greater satisfaction, greater actually engagement and sense of belonging from our diverse staff based on this particular practice and approach that we've taken. And actually we validate that every year during our climate survey.
One of the things that I was going to add to that, which ties it back to the first question on the definitions with the goals, within Bon Secours Mercy Health, the great thing that we have done on our own is decided we're going to live what we say that we're going to do and be. So kind of putting our money where our mouths are on increasing representation. for accountability, we want our business to reflect the populations and the communities that we serve. So we set a hiring goal, which is an incentive-based goal, as a part of our accountability for this year to improve and increase the number of ethnic minorities in director and above positions so that we can better reflect the communities that we are serving and providing health care to. And the entire ministry, meaning the board, the CEO, and the leaders are all on board here. So we have buy-in from them. And then with respect to the current associates in our ministry, we are creating mentorships and other opportunities to retain the minorities, ethnic minorities, as well as others within our ministry. So that, again, just goes to show that if you set a goal and you're all in alignment around it, it can be achieved. And then we're also doing community health outreach. Another of our KPIs for this year is to work with our community health and population health team and establish partnerships in the communities so that we can assist people in obtaining jobs within our health system. So we work with workforce development and our chief and his team there so that in the future, these partnerships and community organizations, high schools, technical schools, and others have the ability to become a part of the talent pool for openings within our ministry. And we're looking at it all the way through so that we can address, again, something that comes up often is social determinants of health and living conditions in the places where people live, grow, work, and earn their living. So if you go to the places where people really need the help, where there is food insecurity, community health is partnering there. Access to clean water, healthy food, helping them to prevent eviction from their homes, and then assist on that economic side to bring them in, that will increase representation of people in the communities. And oftentimes those suffering are in ethnic minority communities and marginalized communities. So that's one way to increase representation in our workplace.
And this is Lonie, and again, thanks for having us. I did want to chime in on something Andrea said earlier too around the employee resource groups. One of our key goals at AmerisourceBergen is to ensure that we do have alignment with the business. That being that we have business partners who are assigned to the ERGs. Many times employee resource groups or business resource groups are looked as only affinity groups. And our goal is to make sure that there's an ROI to the existence of the ERGs. And so assigning business partners to each one of the ERGs is important because you will have measurable outcomes. And I think we all are aware what gets measured gets done. And so having metrics tied to that is critical. And then another part of that too, from a diversity standpoint, is ensuring that we're assigning diverse individuals to those ERGs. I think a lot of times in the D&I world, and we all have worked it, we forget that some of the biggest allies and most critical allies that we need in this space are white men. And so it is intentional that we ensure that we engage white men, white business leaders, white male business leaders as part of the employee resource groups, not only as business partners, but also as champions and as sponsors. That enforces that engagement from the employee resource groups. It also ties to when we're talking about talent acquisition and talent management, that diversity is important.
Lonie, if I may, and I want to jump on a comment that you made here, which is very true around the BRGs, is right, the importance of alignment, right, to business strategies. And so one of the things that I would offer here to the audience is, how are you compensating your BRG leaders? And what I mean by that is, it doesn't have to be necessarily financially, but do you have, for example, your BRG strategy aligned with your talent management strategy, right? That's one of the things that we have done here, again, because they are truly, as Lonie described, and business research groups. And so what we have done is give them a straight assignment by serving in the BRG. Their time is completely protected. And if they are certainly a non-exempt, we have actually dollars that are set aside to pay for the time that they're spending within the BRG, especially clinical folks, right? Because we don't want to put those managers or clinical areas, right, in a very difficult predicament of having, right, to allow someone to go to the BRG activity or event, and yet, right, they have to actually cover for that person's, time or shift, right, at the bedside. So we have been pretty thoughtful about that. And then certainly their time not only is protected, but they also get credit for the time that they spent as a BRG leader. So they have an individualized development plan, and part of that is also tied to their annual appraisal. Are you giving them credit, right, for the role that they are certainly, right, orchestrating and what they're delivering to the organization and to the community at large? And then thirdly, also making the concerted effort and realization, right, that these are actually part of our talent pipeline, right? They're part of our bench strength. So are we developing them further beyond the BRG role, right, to have them ready for other roles, leadership roles in the organization? And that's the other piece that we have done in partnership with our learning folks and development folks. So really working on, building that into their individualized development plan, so they also have the ability to further their leadership development as well.
I just wanted to make one comment, Andres. That's a great point, because we have leadership councils for diversity and inclusion in each of our market, and our market presidents oversee that for us within our ministry. And the ministry resource groups, which is what we call them, are all parts of those councils. So they sort of feed up into the leadership councils for diversity and inclusion. So when what we call the entire groups are our boots on the ground for accomplishing diversity and inclusion, business goals, healthcare anchor network initiatives, and so forth, all throughout the ministry. So yes, playing into that, the accountability is there, and then it also gives them the opportunity to assist in the workforce planning, workforce development, and the full connection of bringing in the talent within our ministry.
Great. So I'd like to share 3 specific initiatives we have implemented to increase the representation of women and minorities in the workforce. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge a comment you made in your opening statement, Andres, where you laid out some of the initiatives that you've put in place to make employees feel welcome and included, because that's really important. It's not just about bringing them in. You have to make them want to stay. And the examples that you gave are really great ways of making sure that they're engaged, they're included, and they want to stay. But specifically, we've implemented a few initiatives to ensure that we are bringing in these underrepresented groups into the organization. And one of them that I would like to highlight is a technology platform that uses artificial intelligence to blind the pictures and the CV when you search a website like LinkedIn, and match up the talent to the job description before the person is exposed to the talent acquisition specialist. And that's one way of reducing some of the unconscious bias in the beginning of the talent acquisition process. Another thing we've instituted, especially for roles that will have people reporting into them, such as directors and above, is that we have introduced a diverse interview panel. And that's where you have members of the Diversity Council interview these senior leaders coming in to explain what the company's culture is, so that they get an opportunity to experience that culture from the outset, so that they can determine if this is a fit for them or not. We make it very clear that we're focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if this is not something of interest for you, it's probably not a good match. And then the third thing I'd like to highlight, and that goes to one of the points you raised, Odesa, is that around the community partnerships. So we've partnered up with an organization, and I'd like you guys to look this up as well, called 110. It's an organization that was formed by some pretty high power CEOs and they have a very specific goal of hiring 1 million Black Americans in the next 10 years. Very influential organization. And that's one way of feeding the funnel at the top and to increase the representation of women and minorities in the workforce.
Great, thanks everyone. This is a good segue as we turn our questions outward from the confines of the healthcare organization to community impact. Otis, we'll start with you. In a nation where minority populations are estimated to be a majority population by 2044, why is there a continued lack of diversity in clinical trials, and how can we change this narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. So diversity of the clinical trial workforce is important, especially in decisions about where the trials are run and other aspects of the clinical trial design and conduct. Many of the programs designed to improve patient diversity in clinical trials tag clinical trial workforce diversity as out of scope. And this is part of the problem and a key driver for the lack of patient diversity we see in clinical trials. It is the clinical trial workforce that is making decisions about where the trials are conducted. They are making decisions about the design of the study, including requirements the research participants will need to adhere to. If the workforce is not sensitive to the needs of the diverse patient population needed for these clinical trials, we will never be able to solve the lack of patient diversity in clinical trials. Now, the standard industry practice is to use historical data to inform where the new trials are placed. And this is a practice that also perpetuates the problem. However, some progressive sponsors and contract research organizations are working to expand the pool of clinical trial investigators and train physicians to become new clinical trial investigators. Some are focused in locations with a high proportion of minority populations. I am a member of the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, ACRP, and they have a diversity council that's focused on increasing the diversity of the clinical trial workforce. And I happen to be leading that particular work stream. And one of the key initiatives that we have rolled out is that we have embarked on a program to educate the ecosystem on clinical research as a career option. This includes a social media campaign with short videos of clinical research professionals speaking about how they got into clinical research and why clinical research is such a fulfilling career option. We are also using these videos as part of a campaign to encourage community colleges and universities, including historically Black colleges and universities, to offer clinical research certificate and degree programs. This brings me to another key point. A diverse patient voice needs to be included in study design and operational planning decisions. So as an industry, we've made progress in this area over the last years. However, we need to be more targeted and deliberate about ensuring that a diverse group of patients get the opportunity to provide input into the design and operationalization of clinical trials. And finally, there's a growing trend in the industry with tremendous potential to solve the clinical trial patient diversity problem. And that trend is decentralization or virtualization of clinical trials, but it must be managed well for it to work. And the reason for this is that there is a misconception that decentralized trials are a threat to traditional sites. I have to say that nothing could be further from the truth. Mistrust is still prevalent in the pharmaceutical industry in which we operate, especially among minority populations. And much of this mistrust was fueled by some significant historic events, including the Tuskegee experiment, which prompted major change to the way clinical trials are delivered. Now, of all the clinical trial delivery roles, the site or the clinical investigator is the closest to the patient and quite possibly the most trusted. So we need to start viewing traditional sites as a conduit into the community to build trust and not as a threat.
Yeah, Douglas, this is Lonnie. Just to chime into Otis, I totally agree. I think that's why it's critical for us who work in this space that when we partner with our community affairs, our community organizations, that we do provide that cultural competent education. There's, to Otis's point, there's a lot of myths and a lot of truths that are in the community around the Tuskegee experiment, around Henrietta Lacks and the cell, the use of her cells. And so the Black and Brown communities do have a distrust, and a lot of that can be won over by education, by having them understand why the clinical trials are important and how they benefit them. I cannot tell you the individuals, even in my own family, who have been hesitant to receiving the vaccine, much less within the Black and Brown communities. But once education is provided, once you engage clinicians who look like the communities that we're talking about, to educate and provide them insight, then there is a much better reception when it comes to clinical trials and the vaccine hesitancy.
Great, thanks, Dr. Lonie. And this is a great segue into the next question. So with the stage that we're at with the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccine equity is top of mind. How are we getting the word out there?
Yes, so I'll say from AmerisourceBergen, we've utilized our employee resource groups to really put the word out in the community, if you will. It's critical that you leverage the resources you have. We have the employee resource groups, but we also have the organizations that we grant and give money to, whether it's the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, whether it's the YWCA or YMCA, whether it's the churches in your community. Leverage those community partnerships to really provide the information and the assurance of why the drug is important. And again, that might mean leveraging pastors or the local barbershop or community leaders who don't have those specific clinical caps, but have respect and trust within those communities.
One of the things that I hear of this room is that it's really meeting the people where they are. And one of the great examples that we have was when our community health team went out to provide food and assistance to the food bank. They started educational toolkits so that people could look at it and see and read about vaccine equity. So although you may not be able, to actually require people to take the vaccine, we can at least educate them about the vaccine.
Hey, Odesa, this is Doug. Do you mind muting your mic and then unmuting it? It sounded like your voice was a little distorted in your response. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So one of the questions that we discussed was how can we increase healthcare awareness as well as the level of care among underrepresented individuals? Andres, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I will, and I want to build on Lonnie's example and certainly his very thoughtful explanation of the vaccine equity. And so that has been our world for the last 15 months here or so in the greater Milwaukee area. And so one of the things that we're able to do, again, and this is actually part of how we also engage our BRGs, was really to understand, right, what are the myths, what may be the hesitancy, right, for our own staff to obviously get vaccinated, primarily because early on during the pandemic, and I'm sure most of you probably already know this or you can research this and you'll see it, the data and the news that were coming out of Milwaukee, being the second most segregated city in America, was that Black males were losing their lives at a much higher disproportionate rate than everyone else. And that was really the story here. And so Freighter, again, because of our commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and now anti-racism as well, decided that we were going to take action on that. So what we ended up doing was that we engaged our BRGs in town halls, forums with our chief medical officer. They were able to provide some really good points, whether the Tuskegee, the Gila cells, right, on the Latinx side, some of the things that have gone on in the Caribbean with certainly some pharmaceuticals where some of our women unfortunately became sterilized as part of that process, right? So there's a rich history of distrust, right? And the role of healthcare. And so one of the key points that our CMO was able to take to heart is that we need to actually acknowledge that, right, openly. So we're not going to actually certainly dance around that. We're going to actually, be very clear that we understand the role, and primarily the role that Freighted actually has played, right, in this particular community. So we're able to do that, and then we were able to then actually engage with them to co-create those key messages that would resonate, right, with our own staff members. And then secondly, we actually then took that same approach in the community, and that became very powerful. One of the things that actually became extremely important for us that was a key takeaway was that our community said, thank you for showing up with humility, right? Not a prescriptive approach and with arrogance, but with humility. And B, that you're allowing us, right, to weigh in on why this is actually a hesitancy issue for us, but more importantly, right, how to address and change it into a vaccine confidence effort. So that really then gave birth to the engagement of our community. And I will tell you, we were the first health system here in the state of Wisconsin that went first to market in a very tailored or targeted approach with our Black African-American community, the Latinx community, in terms of creating a public service announcement. And here's the kicker. Not only did we actually were able to do that, right, take the suggestions of our community, but one of the key aspects of that suggestion was, let's not use even your diverse staff members. That will not resonate. Use one of our community leaders that is trusted. So we're able to do that on the Black African-American side. We're able to actually use G. Smith from G. Clippers. He's actually well-known entrepreneur. Actually, he owns a barber shop, and he's the barber of the Bucks, of the Milwaukee Bucks. But more importantly, he has carved out square footage in his barber shop where he actually created a mini clinic where now Freighted can go in, educate, conduct screenings, right? And now we're actually in the process of creating a memorandum of understanding to actually look at providing care on site at the barbershop, right? But because he's trusted, when he talked about his why he was getting vaccinated or why it was important for him and for the community to take that on, we started seeing, right, the community responding to the call to action and, right, making the appointments to get vaccinated. And not only did they come here, but again, we actually conducted those vaccination clinics in the community, including at G. Clippers, right? So that was actually extremely important for us. And I think that that's the way in which we need to respond and really show up in the community, right? Again, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of brain trust here, but it has to be one coupled with our community, right? To be in lockstep, but show up with that humility. And once you do that and you're able to engage them and certainly understand the why and some of the ideas that they have, then you're going to be able to create a much better product or solution to respond to those needs. And that was actually the way in which we've been able to actually stay the course, not only to educate right around how to stay healthy and well, but more importantly, why is it important to get vaccinated? And now, right, starting addressing other key issues, right, health disparity issues that continue to plague our community here as well. So we're using the vaccine confidence as a huge win, a great step in the right direction, but now building on that, right, and understanding how do we actually sustain that, right, long term. So that would be an example of how we were able to respond to that call to action and how we were also able to leverage, right, our own brain trust here, right, our BRGs, to really guide that strategy both internally as well as externally.
Very good. Thank you for that, Andres. I would like to address this awareness issue from a clinical trial perspective, because clinical trials is a part of healthcare. And there is a lack of awareness of clinical trials and its benefits, especially among minority communities. And the benefit of focusing on patient diversity in clinical trials is that a population that is more closely aligned with the profile of those affected by the disease will have access to clinical trials of medical innovations intended to prevent that disease. And I'll give you a specific example. So in studies of a drug called Pegasus, which is a treatment for chronic hepatitis B infection, African Americans demonstrated lower response rates compared to Caucasians. And in another drug for metastatic colorectal cancer, Japanese patients exhibit lower Cmax an area on the curve than Caucasian patients. So it is important to understand these components to facilitate the commercial success of the product, and then more importantly, to make sure that the drug is making it to those who need it. So one of the things that we've done is that we've partnered with a nonprofit organization called CCDP, which is short for Center for Information on the Study of Clinical Research Participant, to run an ad campaign targeted at minority communities to promote the importance of clinical research in bringing forward treatments to treat underserved population and to make sure that drugs are studied in the appropriate population so that they benefit all and not just a few.
Great, thanks Otis and Andres. We are now going to transition to our Q&A portion of the event. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A chat and we will get to as many as we have time for. The first question that we will address comes in from Lauren, and she mentioned that she agrees with the idea of aligning the organization's mission, vision, and values during this very political, highly emotional charged time. How do you make sure that we are not being exclusive in our efforts to be inclusive?
I can give just one example, if you can hear me okay, of something that we have been doing in diversity and inclusion. We've rolled out a program called Difference is Dialogue that gives every person in the organization an opportunity to be included in the conversation around the efforts that we are making to become and continue to be a more inclusive and engaged culture. That allows every race, every ethnicity, every gender person to come into a room, have a conversation. It's a safe space to engage in dialogue so that no race or ethnicity or gender will feel left out. The other thing is when you also educate your associates or your population within your workforce as to why you're taking certain steps and why you want to attain certain goals, they come on board and then join in as you're trying to be a better organization. So what we do is we have a great communication cascade. We use our leader updates. We even get feedback from our associates as to what they would like us to be involved in or see next when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think a part of it is being more inclusive. We do associate experience surveys, we do leader surveys, just so that we're making sure that everything that we do is in alignment with what it is that we have as our strategy for our ministry. So it doesn't leave anyone out so that people feel like you're being exclusive. It allows people to voice their opinion, to share in conversation with one another, and to also participate in the process for becoming more inclusive and more engaged in this very highly charged political and social environment in which we're living right now.
Great answer. And I'll just amplify that by saying that for us, it has been a mirroring experience. We actually we created a pre-election plan in partnership with HR, right, to address this particular issue and to provide guidance to our leaders, right, on how to handle that in their particular organizations. And what we said is, hey, they can have healthy dialogue, but we'll not allow disrespect, knowing that dignity and respect is one of our key values within the organization, right? And so we were not going to tolerate that between or among team members, right, staff members, nor allowing patients to also come in, right, and create high stakes in some of our waiting areas. So we're very clear in terms of delineating that. But I think one of the pieces that we did as well, and I'm really proud of our CEO, was that we have taken certain stances, right? And one of them was when certainly in the last 15 months, and we started seeing the triple crisis, right, of the pandemic, certainly the economic impact, and then the community unrest, our CEO was in lockstep with a plan that we had already formulated or recommended, and it had been approved on things that we needed to do, right, and how to communicate that as well. And so one of the key actions that we took was actually to take a stance against racism and calling it a public health crisis, right? And educating people for why we were taking that stance, right? Based on the healthcare disparities that exist here and how we're driving, right? And changing that moving forward, right? So again, educating, right? Creating that awareness. And then certainly saying, hey, we're going to be communicating certain messages, but ultimately, whatever message we're communicating is not about aligning with the Democratic or the Republican Party. It's all about how does this, right, measure up to our mission, to our vision, and more importantly, to our values, right? And here's what is expected of you, irrespective of which party, right, or not, right, you might align or not. And so we made sure that we were providing that guidance, that education. And I will tell you, 4 years ago, we didn't take that approach. We had, during that election, at least 20 incidences that we were actually involved with. This past year, we only had one issue that was actually, that ended up rising to the top, that we actually had to come in and be part of the employee relations team investigation to certainly provide our way into. So I think ultimately the key message here is make sure that you're clear on how you're communicating, right, what's being communicated, and how that aligns, right, also with your mission, vision, and values. Because I think that that's the piece, right, that everyone, at least our staff, has signed up for, right, to deliver on our mission as an organization. And when people know that that's really the end goal, then we can actually, right, navigate some of this politically charged, understanding that, yeah, they provide some guardrails. We can still have some discussion, but it has to be in a healthy manner, and we cannot disrespect one another. So that has been key for us here at Freighter.
Excellent, excellent, Andres. I would like to address one of the questions that just came in around how developed are the ERGs, or the Employee Resource Group. At my company, we have 3 ERGs, and we have a request for 2 more, and the 3 are in different stages of development. We began this journey back in 2017, where we formed our first employee resource group, and this one was the Women's Leadership Network, and that group was formed to solve a very specific problem. We looked at the data that we had, and we had roughly equal numbers of women and men in the company. But when you took a closer look at the different levels, and I think you spoke about this a little bit, Odesa, when you looked at director and above, there was such a disparity. There were very few women in leadership positions. So that's why that ERG was formed, and many of the programs were designed to get women into leadership positions. And then last year, when we had the social outcry around George Floyd's murder, we decided to form a People of Color network. And at the same time, we formed a diversity council to create that structure that would allow us to form other ERGs. And the specific reason for forming the People of Color network was that we looked at the data again, and we just didn't have enough people of color in the company to begin with. So we needed to bring people in at different levels and to foster their development as well. Now, one of the lessons we learned, which was the other part of the question, is that a lot of the initiatives that each of the ERGs developed, a lot of them overlapped. So very quickly, we learned that there was opportunity for collaboration among the ERGs to be more impactful. So I would encourage you to look for those opportunities to have joint events and joint initiatives to make more of an impact. And then to address the last point on the question that you responded to, Andres, about being careful to not exclude while you're trying to include. So we actually experienced that when we were about to form our LGBTQ plus ERG. So when we issued the initial announcement to ask for volunteers for people who would like to have a leadership role in the organization, we got very few responses. And then we decided to look at our communication, and we made one adjustment to the communication because we didn't realize that we were inadvertently excluding people. And what we said was, we're looking for volunteers. You do not have to identify with that specific community to volunteer. And then that was the magic. So we have to be careful about the language that we use to avoid inadvertently excluding people.
And I'll just piggyback on that, on one comment that you made, Otis, around that. For our ministry resource groups, anyone can participate in those groups. We have ABLE for the disabled. You do not have to be a person with a disability to participate. There is a Pride resource group. There is a nursing resource group. There's about to be another resource group around racial equity and justice. It doesn't matter what your race is, to be a part of it and to support it. So I think that that's something that we all have to be more open to as organizations, including people who do not necessarily identify, but are there to assist in the needs that the people in that group may desire to strive for. And then I think that there was a question that came up around people who are afraid to have conversations about race and so forth. And how do you get people on board so that they're not afraid of that? And one of the things that goes to, I believe, strictly is training and training within the organization. We rolled out our training program even before the George Floyd situation with anti-bias, cultural sensitivity, and we added the anti-racism training. And so we started out with our board of directors and our executive leadership council, who reports to our CEO, and all of the leaders, directors, and above in our ministry, including providers like our physician practice, and trained them on how to come into a safe space, have a conversation about race, and that it is okay to feel uncomfortable in those discussions. So I think that if you don't embrace that and allow the staff or the others within your organization to feel comfortable and to understand through training that not everyone agrees with every aspect, but it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations, that's a part of having an inclusive culture. That's what diversity and inclusion is all about.
And Douglas, real quick, I know time is tight. About the inclusion, I would just encourage the individuals listening to always use data and use metrics. We're rolling out a new program for directors and above who are diverse. And the first question that was posed to me, why this group was first just Black and Latino or Latinx or Hispanic. And my response was that the metrics tell us that directors and above are disproportionately impacted in our space when it comes to Blacks, when it comes to Hispanic, Latinx employees. Doesn't mean that it's not happening to our Asian population or to women in general, but the metrics show us that right now, disproportionately impact our Blacks and Hispanic or Latinx employees. So, the exclusion versus inclusion piece is important, and use metrics to build that narrative. The data never lies. The data is never wrong.
In your last question, Douglas, where you were looking at what's next for diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare, Lonie, I think that ties directly to your last comment. Taking the data, taking a look at it, and seeing where we are moving the needle and not making diversity, equity, and inclusion a flavor of the day type conversation. I truly believe what's next for it is seeing if the initiatives and the strategies that we put in place within our organizations are actually being impactful. And that means impactful within our ministry for me, within all of our organizations, and within the communities we serve. I mean, if we are here to provide healthcare, to take care of the sick, the dying, the poor, the underserved, and we are not putting into place any actions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which helps us internally and externally attain those goals, then we really need to rethink our strategies. So I think that that's truly what's next for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little short on time, and thank you so much for everyone joining, and a special thank you to our panelists feel free to check out our Halo's previous events on our YouTube page, and we will keep you updated about future events. Halo is hosting a virtual roundtable event on Friday, July 16th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central, centered around best practices for building a veteran hiring program. We will be sending surveys out early next week to get your feedback as we continue to iterate for future events. And again, really appreciate everyone joining, and have a great weekend.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.